what if the next major global superpower doesn't start with, a physical plot of land or a centuries-old constitution? What if it literally starts right now as a highly aligned chat room on a cloud server? Can a digital network actually replace a physical nation-state? Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving deep into the network state ontology, redefining our social glue as fluid moral energy, and taking a hard look at the paradoxes and, frankly, the structural absurdities of digital statecraft. We'll be looking strictly at the source material to see how you build a society in the cloud and why it might eventually crash back down to Earth. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the network state ontology, then explore devalence and moral energy. Third, we'll uncover the Balaji paradox, followed by the vectors of structural absurdity, and finally, we'll look at resolving those contradictions. Section 1. The network state ontology. For centuries, a nation meant static physical borders and centralized databases, right? But our sources outline a total paradigm shift. Cloud first, land last. A network state is essentially a highly aligned online community that builds itself digitally first. It uses crypto and decentralized tech to manage its citizens long before it ever tries to crowdfund a single physical acre. The scale of this shift is absolutely massive. Traditional IT relies on rigid, tree-like hierarchies. Think mapping out physical servers. But a network state requires a dynamic, living map. It uses decentralized graphs to translate actual human intent into automated execution. You're basically trading a static paper map for a living, breathing digital organism. Section 2, devalence and moral energy. Which begs the question, if we ditch physical land, what actually holds this cloud-first society together? Well, the sources present this tripolar system to explain the cohesion. First, there's R, the root. That's the rigid, unyielding machine base. Then D, the deterministic layer, which projects moral legitimacy. And finally, NS, the network state itself. That NS layer absorbs the friction between cold machine code and our messy human reality, scaling that moral energy into a highly adaptive structure. And to explain how strong this bond needs to be, the sources draw a brilliant, if highly nerdy analogy to physical chemistry. They say legacy social networks are like weak chemical bonds. You're just there for transient economic self-interest. But a network state requires a devalence mechanism. They literally compare it to molybdenum 2 acetate, a compound with a hyperstable quadruple bond. In plain English, you have to deliberately strip away your old institutional ties and bond incredibly intensely around a shared core. To keep this intense structure from completely collapsing, you need what's called a one commandment. Think of it as the ultimate social anchor. This could mean highly immersive lifestyle enclaves. The texts mention a keto, kosher, sugar-free society, or a digital Sabbath guild that actually pulls the plug on the internet every single night. It's this one hyper-focused moral premise that binds citizens together when the community faces stress. Section 3, the Balaji paradox. Now, why are people so eager to exit normal society to build these intense parallel structures in the first place? That brings us to the Balaji paradox. It highlights a terrifying flaw in human systems. Tribalism almost always beats empirical truth. Think about it. In this dynamic, if you admit an error, you personally lose status. But if you make an error, the cost usually gets pushed onto everyone else. The result is that truth gets decided by whoever has the most social clout, not by the actual data. From this perspective, legacy media and institutions act as mere signal repeaters for their respective tribes. The texts highlight historical moments where institutions have actively rewritten history just to cover their own failures and protect their status. It's exactly this deep, fundamental distrust that triggers the urgent drive to exit and to build mathematically verifiable enclaves. Section 4, structural absurdity. Because as you might guess, escaping the physical world for a digital utopia isn't exactly seamless. The sources map out what they call an uncertainty-absurdity spiral, outlining 5 major vectors of structural absurdity. This basically happens when a system strictly follows its own formal rules straight into operational collapse. These vectors are sovereign security, economic affordability, administrative structures, computational statecraft, and territorial game theory. Let's look at how this actually plays out in reality. Take sovereign security, for example. The whole premise is operational independence through borderless crypto. The absurdity? These startup societies almost entirely rely on their physical host nation's tax-funded police for protection, while actively trying to strip that exact same nation of its tax base. Or look at the territorial vector. Projects trying to exert private corporate control over land inevitably spark massive backlash from the locals who actually live there. But perhaps the most glaring is the administrative absurdity. The network state ideal preaches total decentralized transparency, yet in practice, you often see shadowy, multi-entity shell structures. The sources highlight a real-world political operation in LA called Neighbors First. They used a complex nesting doll of legal entities designed by a law firm to completely shield donor identities while blasting out attack ads. It's an architecture that preaches the light but operates entirely in the dark. Section 5. Resolving the contradictions. So, with all these absurdities, is the network state just a doomed venture capital project? Well, the crucial point here is captured perfectly by Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin. He points out that exit alone is insufficient to stabilize global politics. Simply abandoning legacy systems to build private, high-cost enclaves doesn't solve the messy reality of global coordination. It risks ignoring the negative externalities of that exit, and it assumes you can sustain a complex society on just one single moral value. For this concept to survive and evolve beyond just a libertarian exit project, the sources argue it has to embrace plurality. That means transitioning away from rigid, single-value enclaves governed purely by automated algorithms, what the texts call the absurdity of computational statecraft. Instead, they need to move toward dynamic digital democracies that prioritize a collaborative civil society. They have to resolve the deep contradictions between the cold, rigid math of smart contracts and the warm, messy, multidimensional reality of physical human coexistence. Which leaves us with this final thought. As we rush headfirst into an era of algorithmic governance, are these network states permanently trapped in their own absurdities? Or can they evolve past their rigid contradictions to forge a genuinely pluralistic network society? The answer to that is likely going to define how humanity coordinates itself for the next century. Thanks for tuning in to This Explainer. Keep questioning the architecture of our world, and we'll catch you next time.